Oh, sorry. Thank you, Nishthab, and thank you very much, Ambassador Mudgal sir, for your very kind opening remarks, and it definitely sets the tone for our entire webinar, and we always continue to look forward to your guidance. So I'll continue with where Mudgal sir left, and the importance of underwater domain awareness has been well elaborated by him. You all know 75% of the earth is water, and I would also like to put a number of 90% lies below the surface of the water. And when we say 90% lies below the surface of the water, so it's extremely important if we have to manage the oceans or manage the water bodies. I mean, it is not limited to the ocean alone. Even the freshwater systems are so very critical. So we need to make sure that we are able to kind of understand, measure what's going on, and then only we can take it forward. So this underwater domain awareness, for which we also have a copyright, looks at the safe, secure, sustainable growth for all in the new global order. Now, when we say global order, what is the new global order? The entire global community is now strategically looking at the tropical waters. And the uniqueness of the tropical water has to be understood if we have to really go forward. The first and foremost, the rich biodiversity. So there is huge opportunity here to explore and exploit. But the other, and even in terms of the non-living resources, so the deep ocean resources that are there are immense. But the problem here is when we talk about underwater domain awareness, the sonar, which is the only means to see below the water, suffers 60% degradation. The conventional sonars, which were designed during the Cold War period, were designed for the temperate and the polar region. And the same instrument or the technology, when it is deployed in the tropical water, suffers 60% degradation. So this is something we need to really be mindful. Otherwise, many of the countries in the Indo-Pacific, which are the, the global south, as we call them, are too heavily dependent on the technologies imported from the West. But if we don't understand these nuances, we'll really go wrong. Now, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific strategic space, the broader definition, I mean, in one way, people say from Hollywood to Bollywood, but the more important definition relevant for today's discussion is that it is the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So if we do not front load the tropical waters or the tropical characteristics, we are really missing out on a huge part of this whole discussion. Now, very important for us to understand that for any strategic perspective, people, economy, nature becomes a very important aspect, which mostly gets forgotten. I mean, the so-called development we talk, the indigenous people or the coastal people or the riverine people are the biggest victim of development. So whose development are we talking about? So the inequality and the lopsided definition of development really puts us in a very, very difficult situation. So when we talk about people, how the coastal communities can be part of this whole development initiative is something we need to look at. We'll elaborate this a little more. So the inclusive governance is a very important part, and livelihood potential. Today, I mean, if you just look at the fisheries sector, 90% people are owning only 10% of the revenue. And the 10% who are engaged in corporate fishing or corporate fisheries are earning 90% of the revenue. So even the policy making gets very, very skewed. Now, the second is the economy. I mean, we have to look at now, we have done enough damage to land. So increasingly, we are looking at the oceans for food security, energy security, and you can keep naming it. So how do we look at it in a manner that it is more efficient and effective? But the most important aspect is nature. How do we make it sustainable? Today, everything is so fragmented. I mean, even sometimes I wonder when we hear about climate change management or, climate change risk assessment, how many times have you heard the word underwater? Without underwater, if 90% of the 75% of the water bodies is below the surface, without a discussion or without inclusion of underwater domain awareness, where are we going even in terms of the climate change management? So, I mean, there are nuances which have to be really understood. Let's go forward. I mean, Maritime domain awareness is a term which we have heard a lot now. But the origin actually was the technical committee of the International Maritime Organization. But, it just came out as a term which didn't get much outreach. But after the 9/11 incident in the US and then subsequently 26/11 incident in India and this part of the world, MDA became a very, very critical term used by the strategic community. But my problem there is, although the basic definition of MDA includes the underwater also, I mean, right from space to underwater, it talks about the entire maritime space. But the problem is that it remained a security-driven formulation. That means the other stakeholders like blue economy and others did not get much attention. The second is it only remained on the surface. So underwater somehow did not get addressed at all. So we need to look at it holistically. Now, when we talk about the stakeholder, we include all the four stakeholders: strategic security, blue economy, environment and disaster management, and science and technology. Now, let's just quickly look at what are the issues. Now, security now has become a very important challenge because of the political volatility, inequality, whole lot of disruptive elements, terrorist groups, piracy, whole lot of such security concerns are kind of becoming a very important aspect. But if we do not understand, but what is happening is we are not able to chase the real reason or the real issues, and we continue to suffer. The second is the blue economy. We are increasingly, as I said, we are increasingly looking at the oceans for food security. But if you look at fisheries, since 1996, the fish stock globally is on the decline. But on the other side, you see 80% bycatch. Now, how do you reconcile this? If 80% is getting wasted and on the other side, fish stock is on the decline, don't you think we need to manage it more effectively? So underwater domain awareness becomes a very important ingredient there. But do our regulators even understand what we are talking about? Then we talk about energy security in this part of the world. I mean, Indian Ocean is very important for energy security. So it enhances the level of interference by the extra-regional powers. Deep ocean mission. I mean, the electric vehicle initiative, 6 times more resources are available in the deep ocean. But do we really have sustainable methods for exploration and exploitation? We really need to look at this very, very carefully. Blue economy, even in the riverine systems, I mean, we are talking about inland water transport, we're talking about a whole lot of other issues. But we have very little understanding of, even the technology availability to the larger global south is very, very little. Now, in terms of environment and disaster management, we know that the speed of sound underwater is 5 times almost, to 345 meters per second in air to 59 meters per second below. So the acoustic habitat degradation, I mean, the marine mammals also use acoustics for biologically critical function. But we do not have acoustic habitat degradation as a major component when we are dealing with the oceans or the water bodies in terms of when we talk about environment impact assessment. So even the environment impact assessment that we do is not really being done holistically. And disaster management, I mean, I've been to Japan after the Fukushima disaster, and I saw, the kind of, so, I mean, I'm not for a moment trying to say that we can prevent a natural disaster, but with early warning systems, we can really minimize the loss of life and property. So what is our preparedness in terms of early warning systems? Again, underwater domain awareness will become a very important input here. And, just to give you some more examples, if we look at the underwater space, we need a lot of work to be done. Now, how do you take science and technology forward? Now, if we just talk about the Indian Ocean or even the India's EZ, we're talking about 3.7 million square kilometers. Can we really put sensors all across? So how do we use the smart technologies? So Ambassador Mudgal also mentioned modeling and simulation. We cannot put sensors in the entire region. So how do we leverage technology? AI and particularly modeling and simulation is a very important aspect which need to cover. So all these needs to be looked at in a very holistic manner. So this is the UDA framework that we have developed. If you look at the 4 sides of the cube, they represent the 4 stakeholders that we talk about: strategic security, blue economy. I mean, each of them have their own diversity in their components, then sustainability and climate change, and also digital transformation. The four sides of the cube may have their own specific requirement, but the core will always remain the acoustic capacity and capability building. If your sonar, which is being used by irrespective of the user, if it is giving 60% degraded performance, but the developing world or the global south continues to buy these equipment from the West. Some of them probably are not aware, but even people who are aware are continuously buying. I mean, there's a lot of geopolitics behind that. But at the same time, we need to be extremely aware that when we're talking about underwater domain awareness, there has to be a lot of indigenous component. So acoustic capacity building becomes the core. Now, if you look at the vertical construct, we have very little understanding of the underwater space around us. So how do we build that? So the sensing analysis, it has to be a bottom-up approach. A lot of areas are not regulated at all, but there are many areas which are over-regulated. So this gives a very, structure. I would call it a comprehensive, structured, and inclusive way forward. How do we bring digital transformation for the coastal community? Can we provide them digital inputs so that they can manage their fisheries and aquaculture better? How do we get AI to these communities so that know where the potential fishing zones are? So a whole lot of work can be done. So, and if you look at this cube, the smaller cubes within the larger cube can be those projects like this part of the world. If you just look at the Indian Ocean region, this is about 25 to 30% of the global population. So how do we make our young people employable is also, I mean, we have to look at the oceans for more and more employment and for more and more engagement, I would say. So I can go on this, but I think this kind of brings a lot of structure. So how do we bring in policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity and capability building can be kind of built through this. Now, we talk about marine spatial planning. I mean, marine spatial is nothing but the digital transformation in the marine space, or I would call it the larger underwater space, including the freshwater systems. Now, if you can see this heat map in the Indian subcontinent, this actually represents the underwater noise because of shipping. The low frequency noise, which is also responsible for big whale strandings. Now, in the western coast of India, we have seen a massive spike in the big whale stranding. So it's a very serious sustainability concern. So this kind of map can be used by multiple stakeholders. I mean, just to give you a sense, the low frequency is also the submarine deployment frequency. So for a defense application also, something like this can be used. Where do you effectively deploy a submarine? But from the other side, from a marine conservation side, also this is very important because you know where the noise is high. So now, not that I'm trying to be a showstopper that, you stop shipping, but at least in the, biologically critical or moments, when there is breeding season, you can at least divert the shipping traffic. So a lot of policy decision from an environmental perspective can be taken. So this kind of digital transformation becomes very, very critical. So we have gone further to this. This is just one example I'm trying to state, but a similar heat map can be also used for navigability in the coastal region. Coastal navigation is now giving more importance because water transport is always far more efficient. So this can be used for that. In terms of fish stock also, if you know where the fish stock is, you can really do the planning of the coastal region far better. So multiple applications. So this is what even the UNESCO is also trying to promote globally. How do we promote marine spatial planning, digitization? And as Mr. Mudgal sir was mentioning, my colleague Catherine Shlok and the entire MRC team under his guidance, we have come to put together a handbook which will be published in a month or two. I mean, the manuscript is ready and it's going to come out very soon. So it really tries to bring the larger concept of MSP on the ground. How will you implement it on the ground is what we are trying to, and looking at all the aspects of policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity and capability building. Now, when we talk about the acoustic capacity and capability building, there are three steps to it. I mean, to see, to understand, and to share. To see is the sensor and the platform. Platform could be an autonomous underwater vehicle or a ship or, a surface, subsurface, manned, unmanned, any kind of vehicle. So this would be the hardware. To see is the hardware, the sensor and the platform which will carry the sensor to the appropriate place. So some of it we can definitely import. But the second part, once you collect the data using these sensors, to understand has to be an indigenous effort. And particularly when we talk about the tropical waters are very, very different. As I said, 60% degradation. So unless we mitigate the tropical challenges, we are not going anywhere. I mean, the data is not usable. And this data is extremely classified. Many times nations are not able to cooperate because the data is highly classified. So we need to look at capacity building where, you know, the local indigenous people or indigenous effort is kind of encouraged. And the third is to share. Now, whatever actionable inputs you have, it has to be shared with the user in real time. But typically what happens is, you know, the user is varied. I mean, right from a policymaker who requires a very certain type of data, but he has the luxury of having a very comfortable office. But what about a fisherman on the ground? The digital input has to reach him in real time. He doesn't have the luxury to carry a laptop. So how do we build mobile apps? And in a format, I mean, if it is a shrimp farmer of a particular species, say L. venemi, he needs input of that in his, he is not bothered about anything else. So we have to make it very specific. And I think when we talk about Indo-Japan collaboration, I think India has the strength to provide the young, smart talent. I mean, the demography, but Japan has really been much ahead in terms of the cutting edge technology. So this partnership can really bring a lot of positive results for the entire global community. The entire digital transformation can be best handled through this collaboration. I want to go a step further too. And one more thing I want to highlight is today when we talk about any exchange of know-how and support, this to see, to understand, and to share comes in one package. It's like a mobile phone. You only use 10% of the features that are there, but you pay so much more. The global south cannot afford to kind of put so much of sensors. So how do we build this up? Even the previous, this MSP that you saw, we have not put sensors to collect this data. We used a modeling and simulation effort using the automated identification system data. We have built this, and the sensor deployment will be only at very select location where we will validate the model. And once the model is validated, this can be replicated across the entire region. You know, you can get so much more, you know, return on investment going forward. The next thing is how the manpower is required for digital transformation. High-end data analytics, you know, we need people who will do the computational infrastructure, the algorithm development, and the entire. But once that data is collected, that has to be interpreted by domain experts. I mean, it can be technical or science people, also disciplines also, but also the liberal arts discipline, political science, various other geopolitics, international relations. So we need domain specialists to look at it. But the third part is more interesting for me, field deployment specialists. The field deployment specialists could be the coastal community. Rather than making, I mean, you imagine the coastal community being part of the entire digital transformation initiative. With a little, I mean, we don't need to teach them. They could probably teach us how to deal with the waterfront, you know, deployment of various equipment. So we need to look at this in a very, very nuanced way where it becomes very inclusive. Even the coastal community who are very comfortable with the water bodies, they can be part of this whole field deployment with a little bit of skilling that is required. So we have developed those skilling programs as well. So I think I'll stop here and hand over back to Nishtha. So in terms of the Indo-Japan collaboration, I think there's so much more we can do together. Japan has been at the forefront. They have developed a lot of hardware, a lot of, you know, they have been sailing across the world, collecting data. So the Indian demography and the Japanese, you know, comfort with the oceans can be a great partnership, and we really look forward to working together. Back to you, Nishtha. Thank you so much.